Yo. All right. I just got out of the shower, but I just wanted to take a quick second to talk about, in my opinion, what is some of the value of Chat GPT 3. Um, so mostly looking at this from like a software development perspective. Let's take a look. So I'm working on a side project and I happen to be using a library called Commanded. This whole project's written in Elixir, so this is an Elixir library. And my goal for using ChatGPT 3 here was to get it to write some new code. Now I've had it write code before for me, but I've mostly tried to get it to write code that I have already written so I had something to compare against. And it was extremely good at that. Including style transfer and things like that, which is super cool. What I mean by style transfer is I was able to give it some of my own examples and say, can you write code similar to the way that I write code? And it was able to do that like extremely well, even with some proprietary, even using some proprietary modules that it for sure has never seen before. So very cool. Just to get started, I wanted to sort of make sure we were speaking the same language, so to speak, by asking it to tell me about the Elixir commanded library. Because if I started to tell it to write code using this library and it had no idea what it was, like I was going to have to teach it what it was first. I was going to have to give it that context. So this was my way basically of asking if it knew what this commanded library was. And, it spit out a reasonable answer here. It talks about how it's a framework for writing event-sourced systems. Goes into a little bit about what event sourcing is. It says some of the key components of the library. And it goes into, like, specific examples. A gen event-based event bus. I honestly don't even know what that is. It's using terms that I haven't seen in any of the documentation. This might be some sort of internal module that it is seen by looking at the source code, but it doesn't matter. Like, I'm sure I could have asked it to elaborate and it would have, been able to expand on any of these points, but it really wasn't the reason why I asked the question. The reason why I asked the question again was just to make sure that it knew what I was talking about if I referred to the command library. So this was more for me to make sure that I can trust it. And then so I give it a little bit more context and I say that I'm working on a project called RustleUp that uses commanded. And again, I'm just trying to feed it information to tell it that there's a project that I am working on called RustleUp. And so if it sees that in my source code, it can know that that's, in my domain. So it says some stuff. I honestly didn't read this. I didn't care. And again, is because what I am looking for is like my goal is to get it to write some code for me. And I knew that, whatever it said here, it's not going to be teaching me anything about my project. So it didn't really matter what it said, because my whole goal was to give it context. It could have said nothing and that would have been fine. Could have just given me a thumbs up. So then I say, giving it a little bit, more context, I say that I have this database table called order that I've created using an ecto projection. So if you don't know what an ecto projection is, it's basically a way of defining a SQL table, and then it will just run some code and create that table in whatever SQL database you're using. I happen to be using Postgres. So here's my ecto projection. You can sort of pause the video and look at it if you want to see it in more detail, but the reason why I gave this is because what I want it to do is, if you're familiar with event sourcing takes events, and you can read this actually in the description that ChatGPT 3 generated above, but it takes events and it projects them into your tables as state. So you don't, your events are your source of truth. And I could theoretically delete this table and recreate it at any point in time, just from the like the events that have happened in my system, because I can always just go back and replay all the events from the beginning of time and recreate this table at any point. So this table here, it's my state that the events get projected into. And the reason why I told it about this table is because I wanted to be familiar with some of the columns, right? So we've got these columns, and since it knows that it's an ecto migration, it should be aware of what this timestamps function is down here. And including, like, I was curious if it would know about these. So this is, I believe this is pretty Postgres specific, but this is a way of making sort of a complex data structure inside of a table. So I'm going to have a column here called like order contact info, and it's going to have these properties within that. So yeah, just again giving a little bit more context, so it's familiar with the columns that I'm storing as state and what their types are. So it says some stuff. I didn't even read it. Again, don't care. Like, it wasn't the point. I was just trying to give it information. And so when you're creating ecto migrations, a lot of times you'll have an ecto schema that kind of mirrors that table. And so that's what I have here. This is the ecto schema. And the interesting thing, the reason why I kind of fed it that it was an ecto schema instead of just saying here's the schema, or even just like pasting in the code and just being like, blah, here's some code, is because I actually have my own little wrapper around ecto schema that just sets a couple of sane defaults for me. So you're going to look through here, and you're not going to actually see the words ecto schema anywhere. You will see these macros, which if you're familiar with ecto schema, you would recognize. But I just wanted to be like really sure that it knew that this was the ecto schema, and more importantly, that it's the corresponding one. It corresponds to the table above. So I'm still just setting it up. It can now kind of see how the ecto fields map to the database fields and make any sort of intuitive relation there. Wasn't sure if that was going to be helpful, but I thought as a human I would want that, so I would give it to ChatGPT here. Again, it said some stuff, and I didn't really care. All right, now we're starting to get into sort of the meat and bones of this thing. So here I'm saying using the commanded projections ecto module. Now this is a third-party library. It's kind of like you can almost think of it like a plugin for the commanded library. It's not part of the core commanded library, but it's by the same developer. It's just another library for projecting events into an ecto schema / Postgres table, whatever your state is stored in. And so I'm saying, using that, can you write a project function? Now the interesting thing here is project versus project. I used the word project before. I said the Russell up project, but now I'm saying write a project function to update the order projection, which it knows about because it saw it. This is the order projection. Update the order projection given the following event. So it can kind of intuit that this is a struct that defines an event. Now, Interestingly, looking at this, it doesn't know what that is. It doesn't know what a rustle up address is. It doesn't even know what a rustle up commanded event is. It doesn't know what an aggregate identifier is. It doesn't know what a z-struct is. This is all proprietary code. Or the z-struct is not, but it is a library that I wrote. It is open source, but I wrote it after GPT was trained. So it definitely did not see this on the internet. Has no idea what that is. But at the same time, there is some familiarity with, some similarities with ectoschemas. So it might have an idea that, this is under the hood defining some sort of struct and it has these given properties. We can take a look at it here. It's got address, drive, which is defined here, has a distance and a duration, some extra instructions, and a set at. So that's the data inside of our event, and we want to project that into our table in some sort of sensible way. And so it comes up with something. I looked at it here, and it's creating a function project, and it basically just passes it into this other function to do the work, which is just setting the address, the drive, the extra instructions, and the set at. And that's just going to update the projection, the order projection struct. It's not going to save it to a database in any way. It's definitely not correct, not what I was looking for. That's okay though. I just wanted to see what it would come up with. It didn't do a great job. But the cool thing is I can say, all right, here's an order projector. So not an order projection. That's the state. The order projector is the thing that takes the events and updates the state. So here's an order projector that uses that commanded projections ecto module that I referred to above, and projects some events already. So I'm basically saying, like, here's an example of how I do this. And there's two project functions in here. So there's one for order created here, and there's one for contact info set. And so it can kind of see how I write code. And so I just said, here's an order projector that I have so far, and paste it in the code. Can you add another project function to the delivery info set, delivery info set based on my example? And this is key, like based on my example. Really, really important. Because I wanted to kind of write code the way that I write code. That's how I'd expect a human to work as well. If I were to just drop anybody into this code base, I would expect them to kind of look around the code base and try to write code the way that the other code is written. I think that's that's like a key goal, is to make it so that if you're going back and reading code later, you don't know who wrote it, because everybody writes code the same way, right? Obviously that's a lofty goal, but whatever. Certainly, here it is. And the cool thing is it didn't just like give me the whole file, right? It's like other imports and project functions. So it's actually doing a good job here. It's doing what I wanted it to. I didn't want it to give me the whole thing. I wanted it just to give me these two things, but it put it in context so I knew, where to paste it or whatever. And looking at this, it's honestly great. We can compare it to the contact info set that I have up here above. So contact info set, this project function, and you can see here that I'm setting a contact key with this sort of module constructor, which just creates a struct for me. it obviously doesn't know that there is a delivery info constructor similar to a order contact info. It doesn't know that there's a order delivery info. So it just uses a map. And like this would have worked. It's fine. Problem is that this set at thing, I don't actually want that. So if we go back and look at our table, all the way up here, and we look at delivery info, what we have is we have a fee, an address, a picked up at, and a delivered at. All right, so those are the things that I want to project into here. The fee, the address, when it was picked up, when it was delivered. And it puts in the drive time. Actually, I probably should add this to the table. Puts in extra instructions. Now it wouldn't know what the fee is. It wouldn't know what the picked up at or the delivered at was. But point is that it just basically copies all the data in there. So A for effort, A minus for execution. I didn't exactly copy same code style because I used this struct here, or I used this map here instead of assuming that there was a struct, and it just sort of one for one copied all the data out of the event straight into the projection, which it should have known would not have worked. But okay, moving on. It's like honestly not bad. And I was happy enough with it. I did actually copy and paste that code and just massage it slightly to add it into my project. And then I said, great, can you do the following? Or can you do the same thing for this event? Now this one is a little bit simpler. It's just called when the order was accepted, and it just has a timestamp saying that it was accepted at some time. And so I expected it to just write a little projector similar to what we saw before, but with no complex data structures. And I expected it to just update this timestamp here from our table schema that I gave it before. And I was actually pleasantly surprised. Let's take a look at what it did. So here we are. Like, can you do the same for the following order accepted event given accepted at? This is what I came up with. It's got a project function here that takes order accepted, looks up the order. Great, that's just exactly how we do it. It updates it and sets the accepted at, and it sets the status. Order status is accepted. There's no status in this event. It totally just intuited that I needed to update the status because that event occurred. And that is actually correct. Now, what's more is when I read this, I had forgotten that I needed to update the status. I did not expect to see this. And if I were to write this code myself, I would have forgotten and had to come back later to, I would have obviously found this issue and would have fixed it, but it would have had to be something that I came back later and fixed because I didn't think of it in the moment. And so this is actually part of the reason why I wanted to make this video, is because some of the hidden value of ChatGPT 3 is the time that it saves you, but not just by being able to do the things that you would do, but faster, but also by avoiding some of the mistakes that you would make, so you don't have to go back and fix them. I think that's pretty cool. And yeah, it totally intuited that. Now how? It's crazy. So how did it intuit that there was this order status accepted thing here? Well, just so we can see how complex its like memory and understanding is, right? So we have this order projection, and we can see that there's a status here, and it's a string. Okay, so we saw before there was an order status module that it was using to call a function on it. So it sees that that's a string. It sees here too that it's text, and also it's not getting the statuses from there. Where did it see that order status from? It saw it in the example that I had given it when I said that this is how I write my order projector. Saw it right here in order created. When you create an order, I say that the status is started. And that's it. Based on that, it was able to figure out that when the order is accepted, that you need to update the status to say that it was accepted. That was crazy. Like, super cool. I copied and pasted this code, didn't need to change a thing, plopped it right into my project, and it worked. Great. Can you do the same for order canceled, order denied, order placed, order submitted? They're all similar to order accepted. Now here, I'm doing something a little different. Here, when I said order accepted, I gave it the code for the event so it could see it. Here, I'm giving it the names, and I'm just saying it's similar to that one. You can probably figure out how it's similar. And it did. Order canceled. Updates the status, it's canceled at. Perfect. Order denied. Status, denied at. Perfect. Now, it does this thing where it like gets tired and cuts off. So just gotta tell it to continue, and it'll pick up. Now the interesting thing is that it doesn't just like pick up right at this line. It kind of knows that it was in the middle of something, and it needs to redo some of the context. So it redoes the module header here, like the def module line, and it redoes the first portion of this project function again. And so it picks up where it left off, place stat, sets the status to place, sets the place stat timestamp. Order submitted. It actually finishes the full project function, but doesn't create this private function that should go down there. And it doesn't close out the module. So I knew it was still in the middle of something, told it to continue. And yeah, here it kind of messed up like very slightly. It defined a private function inside of a project macro, but whatever. Like it honestly, that was fine. It was perfectly fine. I just was able to copy and paste that one little function, and it gives some more context. I didn't read any of it. At this point, I was like, okay, great. I got what I needed. I started this whole thing. I wanted to write new code, and it did. And honestly, it did a great job. If I were, more of a junior developer, like this extra stuff might be helpful to kind of like tell me what it's doing, what it's thinking, but I was able to look at the code and just know what it was doing. Again, since it's like copying code that I wrote, I knew what I was thinking when I wrote the original code. And so I know the intention around the code that it's generating as well. Maybe if I hadn't written the original code and I was saying, maybe it was written by a coworker of mine, I was like, okay, can we add more to this and paste it in my coworker's code? I might find this sort of explanation helpful. So that's, potentially more value that in this exact example, I didn't exactly need, but could be useful. And then finally, this was an interesting one. Maybe not as interesting as some of the other examples that we already looked at, but I asked it to do one more projection for an order type. Now, the reason why I thought that this one was interesting is because it's so vague. Like, what is an order type? And as a human, like, I kind of want to know. It's like the order type was set. There's this type. It's an atom, okay, but like, what are the possible values? It's like if it were an enum, what are the enum values? And it's got a timestamp telling me when it was set, but there's just so little concrete context here. Like as a human, my brain is left wondering, like, is it order type like pickup and delivery? Is it saying, this is a like an in-house order versus some sort of extra like delivery or pickup? Is it possibly a scheduled order or an order that is meant to be made right now, ASAP? Like, what is order type? And there's just no context here. But the thing, like, this is why I think it's interesting. It's like ChatGPT knows that context actually doesn't matter. It doesn't need it to do what it's being asked to do. And so it still is able to come up with a projector that just sets the type, because it doesn't matter what the values are. You're just going to copy it straight out of the event and into the table. If we go back and look at the table, what is the type of the type field? It's just a string. So it doesn't matter if it's pickup or delivery or ASAP versus scheduled. None of that is important. It's just copying a string. And it understands that. So that I thought that was cool. It's able to actually do more powerful stuff, maybe because it's less curious. And that's where I left off. Like, it created probably a couple hundred lines of code and all inclusive with the actual typing, plus the bugs that it avoided, plus the time that it saved me from not just being overly curious about stuff that doesn't matter for the task at hand. I would say it probably saved me a couple hours at least. Like, this took half an hour. I think it could be done faster with some practice and just better understanding of how ChatGPT works. But overall, this was great. I love the style transfer. It's able to copy code in my style when I copied and pasted in here. I'll probably look back in 6 months and have no idea if it was me or if it was ChatGPT 3 that wrote this. We're living in the future. That's all there is to say, really. We're living in the future. This is super valuable, and I can't wait to just see what's next. Cool. Thanks for watching.